The dawn that broke over Alderwood Manor was not a sunrise. It was a wound in the sky. 3 days had passed, and the air still tasted of cinders and regret. Where the grandest estate in the northern marches had once stood, proud against the skyline, now only blackened stone skeletons remained. The ground crunched under a single pair of bare feet, not the sound of earth, but of burned wood, shattered glass, and broken promises. In the center of that desolation, a figure stood motionless. Lyra Valerius was painfully small against the vast open horror, just 18. Her dress, once a hand-me-down treasure from her elder sister, hung from her thin frame in tattered gray strips. Her hair, the color of winter wheat, was matted with soot and something darker, something that had dried 3 days ago. Her feet were raw and bleeding, leaving faint crimson prints on the hot ash. She looked exactly like what the soldiers circling the distant tree line expected to see. A broken thing, the sole survivor, hollowed out by grief. But then she lifted her head, and the weak morning light caught her eyes. They were not gray, not blue. They were silver, true liquid silver that seemed to glow with their own cold inner fire. The mark of the Valerius bloodline, the so-called curse that had drawn death to her doorstep. And in those silver eyes lived something the soldiers should have feared more than any old wives' tale. It was not grief, it was a promise, a patient, precise, and utterly cold promise. The promise of a survivor who has nothing left to lose and an eternity to plan how to make everyone pay. But how did a sheltered girl become the only one left breathing after the bloodiest night in the kingdom's memory? What could possibly justify the murder of 53 souls, from the eldest grandfather to the newborn cousin asleep in his crib? And why, after 3 days of standing vigil in this graveyard of everything she loved, was there still fire in those cursed silver eyes? The answer was not simple. It was woven from ancient lies, a frightened king, and a prophecy that had been sharpened into a knife. The smell of smoke had become a part of Lyra. It coated her tongue, filled her lungs, settled in the hollow of her chest like a second, darker heart. She didn't feel the cold morning air biting her skin. The only thing she could still feel was the final crushing weight of her mother's body, a shield of flesh and love in those last terrible moments. Child. The voice was a dry rasp from behind her. Old Marta appeared, her face a map of wrinkles and fresh fear. The herb woman had lived on the edge of the Valerius lands for decades, too insignificant to notice. She'd found Lyra hours after the screaming stopped, pulling her from the rubble with a strength that defied her age. They are coming back, the Kingsmen, the Bloodhawks. We must go, now. Lyra did not turn. Let them look. You cannot fight them. You are just a girl. This time, Lyra turned. Her silver gaze fell upon Marta, and the old woman took a step back, shocked by what she saw there. There was no girl in those eyes. I am the last Valerius, Lyra said, her voice a hollow whisper. I am the one they forgot to kill. Marta's wrinkled hand shot out, gripping Lyra's arm with desperate strength. Your mother's last words, remember? Before she said, show them the truth, my heart, not the fire. Promise me you will show them the truth. I heard her. Do you? Lyra's eyes tracked the approaching riders. Their leader's armor bore the insignia of a thorned rose and a slashing blade, the mark of Commander Silas Kane, the Bloodhawk who had led the slaughter, the man who gave the order to burn the manor with her family trapped inside. I remember, Lyra whispered. Then she allowed Marta to pull her away, back toward the tree line, into the shadows where the dead could not follow and the living learned to become ghosts. But as the forest swallowed them, Lyra's silver eyes remained fixed on the ruins. She did not away look. She was counting, memorizing, weighing every single debt, and she swore on the ashes of her family that every one would be paid in full. Before you judge her, before you decide what you would do in her place, you need to understand what truly happened. You need to hear the screams she heard, smell the smoke she breathed, feel the betrayal that shattered her world. Because the truth, I warn you, is so much worse than you can possibly imagine. 3 nights earlier, the skies above Alderwood Manor were clear, the stars like scattered diamonds. The great hall was a constellation of its own, ablaze with torchlight and alive with laughter. It was a night of celebration. Lyra's youngest brother, 8-year-old Elias, was to receive his true name in the ancient Valerius ceremony, a tradition older than the crown itself. 53 souls filled the hall. Aunts, uncles, cousins from distant branches, all gathered under one roof for the first time in years. The air was thick with the scent of roast lamb, spiced wine, and joy. Lyra remembered spinning in a circle with her twin sisters, Ilara and Mirren, their matching braids flying, their laughter like chimes. She remembered her father, Lord Cassian Valerius, his silver eyes gleaming with pride as he raised a cup. She remembered her mother, Lady Isidold, moving through the crowd like sunlight, touching a shoulder here, sharing a smile there, making everyone feel they belonged. For the last time in her life, Lyra Valerius felt perfectly, completely safe. The sound that shattered that peace was not a scream. It was the thunder of hooves on the courtyard stone, a pounding rhythm that spoke of urgency, of numbers, of purpose. At first, there was only confusion. The great oak doors, banded with iron, shook under a heavy, relentless blow. A guest, perhaps, arriving late? A messenger? Then the world exploded. The doors did not open. They disintegrated. Splinters of ancient wood flew like daggers, and through the smoke and debris they came. Not guests, not messengers, warriors. A wall of black armor and cold steel filling the doorway, choking the hall with the smell of oiled metal and intent. The Bloodhawks, the king's own ruthless hand. And at their head, mounted on a warhorse the color of midnight, was Commander Silas Kane. His face was hidden behind a helm, but his presence was a wave of winter. And beside him, dressed not in armor, but in the rich purple and gold of the royal house, stood a man whose face Lyra knew from court portraits, Duke Kaelin, the king's own uncle. His expression was not of duty, but of something colder, sharper, something like satisfaction. He unrolled a scroll. The king's seal, a heady lump of red wax, dangled from it like a hanged man. By the order of His Majesty, King Ronan, the Valerius bloodline stands condemned for the practice of dark sorcery and conspiracy against the crown. The sentence is death, all of it, no quarter, no survivors.
For one heartbeat, there was perfect stillness. It was a mistake, a terrible, impossible mistake. Lord Cassian stepped forward, hands raised, his voice calm but firm. Duke Kaelin, there's an error. Our family has served for centuries. We are loyal. The crossbow bolt took him in the throat. It happened so fast. One moment her father was speaking, a pillar of strength. The next, he was falling, a dark flower blossoming on his white tunic, his silver eyes wide, not with pain, but with a profound, devastating betrayal. He crumpled to the floor, and the sound his body made was the sound of Lyra's world breaking. Her mother's scream was the first of many, a sound of such raw anguish it seemed to tear the very air. Lady Isolde threw herself over her husband's body, a human shield. Then hell was given its orders. "Burn it," roared Commander Kane. "Leave nothing." The Bloodhawks charged. Swords rose and fell. Fire arrows hissed through the high windows, biting into tapestries, catching on drapes, climbing the wooden beams with hungry, crackling fingers. The scent of roasting meat was replaced by the stench of burning hair and flesh. Lyra was frozen. The beautiful hall became a painting of nightmare. Her uncle Alistair, roaring a challenge, was cut down by 3 swords at once. Her cousin's wife, clutching her swaddled infant, disappeared under a falling beam wreathed in flame. Laughter turned to shrieks, music to the clang of steel, celebration to slaughter. A hand, strong, desperate, closed around Lyra's wrist. Her mother. Lady Isolde's face was streaked with tears and soot, but her silver eyes burned. "Run," she hissed, pulling Lyra and the twins toward a small, hidden door behind the great hearth, the servants' passage. "The root cellar. Go now. Do not look back." They ran. Alara was sobbing. Myrene was silent, her face a mask of terror. Their fine dresses caught on stone corners, ripping, leaving pale threads in the darkness like trails for wolves. Behind them, the sounds of dying followed. The root cellar was a cold, damp space beneath the kitchens, a vault for potatoes and turnips. Isolde shoved them inside, her body blocking the doorway. In the dim light from the hall, Lyra could see the love and the terror warring in her mother's eyes. "Stay silent. Stay hidden. No matter what you hear, you do not come out. Do you understand me? Promise me." "Mother, come with us," Lyra begged, reaching for her. "I love you," Isolde whispered, her voice breaking. "Remember that. Remember everything." Then she was gone, pulling the heavy wooden doors shut, sealing them in darkness. The world became sounds, the thunder of boots overhead, the crash of furniture, the roar of the fire growing closer, hotter. Then voices, right outside the door. "The children, find the silver-eyed children," a man's voice, hard as granite. "Commander Kane." "They are not here," her mother's voice, calm and clear as a bell, echoed in the passageway. "I sent them away hours ago. You will never find them. Search every inch." "You are wasting your time," Isolde said, and I could hear her shifting, putting herself squarely in front of the cellar door. "I am Lady Isolde Valerius, and you will touch my children only over my corpse." A pause. A chill filled the air, even in the stifling cellar. A new voice, smooth as silk, slithered through the cracks in the door. "Duke Kalen." "That, my lady, can be arranged." The sound that followed was not loud. It was wet, final. A gasp. Then the heavy, terrible thud of a body hitting the earth floor. Lyra clapped her hand over Alara's mouth to stifle her whimper. She bit her own lip until she tasted blood. They huddled together, 3 girls trembling in the dark, listening to the world end. The cellar door rattled once, but did not open. The footsteps moved away. The fire grew louder, an angry beast consuming its meal. Smoke began to seep through the floorboards, thick and choking. Heat pressed down on them. Time lost all meaning. It might have been minutes, it might have been hours. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, the world above them gave way. The ceiling of the root cellar exploded inward in a shower of stone, timber, and fire. Alara screamed. Myron's hand was ripped from Lyra's grip, and the last thing she knew was the crushing weight of her mother's body, falling from above, covering her one final time, as the world went black and silent. When consciousness returned, it brought only weight and darkness, and a silence so complete it was louder than any scream. She was buried, pinned, alone. She lay there, in that tomb, the cold bodies of her sisters on one side, her mother on top. She did not cry, she did not pray. She simply existed, a heart still beating in a world of the dead. Then she heard new voices above, muffled, the Bloodhawks picking through the ruins. "Check for survivors. The Duke wants confirmation. Every Valerius dead." And in that moment, buried beneath the bones of her home and her family, Lyra Valerius made her first conscious choice since the nightmare began. She would not die here. She would remember every face, every voice, every name, and she would make them all pay. King Ronan of Silverwood was a man haunted by a ghost that had not yet finished dying. 3 years on the throne had carved lines in his face that belonged to a man twice his age. He stood at the high window of his solar, watching the first snow dust the capital. But he did not see beauty. He saw only ash falling softly, covering everything. He could not escape the memory of that scroll, the crisp parchment, the heavy royal seal, the weight of the quill in his hand. His uncle's voice persuasive, urgent in his ear. The prophecy is clear, nephew. When 7 silver-eyed heirs united under one roof, the crown shall shatter, and the land shall bleed. The Valerius family has gathered all 7 of their children, Edmund and Isolde, their 5, all together at Alderwood for the naming. They are not celebrating, they are conjuring. They mean to unmake your reign.
Ronan had been young, scared. The border skirmishes were increasing. Crops were failing in the east. His advisors whispered of unrest, of old magic stirring. And then his uncle presented the ancient text, the so-called Blood Song Prophecy, with its dire warning about silver eyes, the Valerius eyes. He had seen them himself, Lord Cassian's piercing, knowing gaze that always seemed to see right through his royal platitudes. "What would you have me do, uncle?" he had asked, the dread a cold stone in his gut. Duke Kaelin's face had been a mask of grim duty. A surgeon cuts away the rot to save the body. You must be the surgeon. Send the Bloodhawks. Make it swift, clean. Let the kingdom see you are strong enough to cut out a Gret to their safety. They are children, Kaelin. The youngest is just a babe. The prophecy says 7 silver-eyed heirs. It does not distinguish by age. A spark is all it takes to start a wildfire. Would you risk the entire kingdom for sentiment? That was the word that had decided it. Sentiment. A king could not afford it, so he had signed. He had given the order to Commander Silas Cain, his most loyal, most ruthless weapon. Eliminate the threat. No survivors. For the safety of Silverwood. He had told himself it was duty, a heavy, terrible duty. Then the reports came, not from Cain, but from the whispers in the taverns, the horrified tales from travelers who passed the still smoking ruins. They spoke not of a clean military strike, but of a massacre, of a manor burned with families inside, of the laughter of celebrating children turning to screams. And the ghosts came, every night without fail. Not the ghosts of Lord Cassian or Lady Isolde, but the children. He saw their faces, though he had never met them. The twin girls with matching braids, the brave-looking older brother, the little one, Elias, whose naming day it had been. Their silver eyes, wide with confusion, then terror, then accusation. They did not scream at him. They just stared, silent. 53 pairs of silver eyes watching him from the darkness. He woke nightly, drenched in sweat, his wife, Queen Alara, shaking him gently. The dream again? He could only nod, unable to give voice to the horror. His gentle Alara, with her kind heart, could never know what he had done. He had built his reign on a foundation of dead children, and it was crumbling beneath him. That very morning, his spy master, a weary man named Farron, entered with a report that turned the stone in his gut to ice. "There are whispers, Your Majesty, from the Alderwood region." "What whispers?" Ronan had asked, his voice too sharp. "Of a girl, seen near the ruins. A girl with pale hair and eyes that catch the light in a strange way." Ronan's heart hammered against his ribs. A survivor? Impossible. Cain confirmed the entire bloodline was extinguished. Cain confirmed what he saw, Farron said carefully, but the woods folk tell tales of an old herb woman, Marta, who has a new shadow, a silent shadow that helps tend the graves. A survivor? One silver-eyed heir left alive, the prophecy spark still glowing in the ashes. Was it a second chance, or a final fatal delay of his doom? He dismissed Farron and stood at his window watching the snow try and fail to cover the sins of the past. He had made a decision based on fear and lies, and now the truth,
A living, breathing truth with silver eyes was out there, and she would be coming for him. Far from the snow-dusted capital in the harsh, wind-scoured Badlands known as the Bleak Expanse, the truth was not a whisper, it was a weight. It lived in a cave, lit by a single guttering candle in the form of an old man named Alistair. He was not the Alistair who died at Alderwood. That was his younger brother, named for him. This Alistair was older, bent like a gnarled tree, his own eyes a faded, misty silver. The last surviving brother of Lord Cassian Valerius, exiled 40 years ago by King Ronan's grandfather for sedition. The sedition was truth. He unrolled a fragile piece of vellum, its edges crumbling. It was not the blood-song prophecy the kings peddled. This was the original, older by centuries, the Guardian's Covenant. He traced the words with a trembling, ink-stained finger. When shadow seeks to choke the crown's light, the silver-sided shall rise, not to break, but to mend, not to rule, but to remind. For their sight is the land's sight, their heart the balance against the tyrant's heart. The Valerius line were not sorcerers, they were guardians. Their silver eyes were a blessing, a connection to the ancient magic of the land itself. They could sense corruption, see deceit, feel the imbalance when power was abused. For generations, they had served as the kingdom's conscience, quiet advisors, trusted stewards, the hidden scales of justice. Until King Theron, Ronan's grandfather, a greedy, paranoid man, when the then guardian, Alistair's own father, discovered Theron's embezzlement in secret pacts with enemy raiders, he prepared to expose him to the Council of Lords. Theron's response was not to reform, but to obliterate. He, with the help of his younger brother, Duke Caelan's father, fabricated the blood song prophecy. They twisted silver-sided into a curse, guardian into sorcerer. They launched a purge, hunting down every branch of the family they could find. Alistair only escaped because he was a second son, studying in the remote archives. He had fled with this very scroll and had been waiting, a ghost in the rocks, ever since. The candle flame jumped. Alistair did not need to turn. He felt her presence, a cool, bright ripple in the stale air of the cave, like a clear bell heard through fog. "You have been long in coming, child," he said, his voice like stones grinding together. Lyra stepped from the shadows. She was thinner than she should be, harder. Her silver eyes, dulled by some herbal paste, still held that frightening, patient fire. Old Marta stood behind her, nodding. "Marta says you knew my father," Lyra said. Her voice was flat, stripped of emotion. "I knew the boy he was. I know the man he became, and I know the ashes he was reduced to." Alistair gestured to a rough stool. "Sit. The past is a heavy burden. You do not need to stand while you learn its true shape." For hours he spoke. He showed her the scroll. He told her of the Guardians, of their true purpose. He recounted Theron's crimes and the great lie that had been built to hide them. He explained how Duke Caelan had simply inherited his father's mission to eradicate the truth-tellers, to keep the throne forever unchecked. Lyra listened. She did not cry. She did not rage. She absorbed the information like parched earth absorbing rain. "So, they died for a lie," Lyra finally said, the words hanging in the cold air. "They died because they were the light, and the shadows feared them," Alistair corrected gently. "Your mother, Isolde, she had the strongest sight in generations. She must have known. She must have felt the trap closing." Lyra's hands clenched in her lap. "What do I do with this truth? Shout it from a hilltop? No one would believe the rantings of a sorcerer's daughter." A faint, grim smile touched Alistair's lips. "Truth is not a weapon you shout. It is a seed you plant. It must be placed in the right soil, at the right time, and nurtured." He leaned forward, his faded eyes suddenly sharp. "But first, child, you must become more than a survivor. You must become what they tried to erase. You must learn to be a guardian." He stood, his bones protesting.
The land's magic is still there, in your blood, dormant, shocked into silence by the trauma. I can teach you to wake it, not for fire and destruction as they fear, but for clarity, for discernment, to see the threads of corruption, to find the weak points in the lies. And then? Lyra asked, her gaze unwavering. And then, Alistair said, you take your truth to the only place that matters. You walk into the heart of the lion's den. You stand before the king who ordered your death, and you show him what he truly destroyed. You show him the guardian. Captain Ryland Vance of the Bloodhawks was a man living two lives. By day, he was Commander Silas Kane's most trusted lieutenant, stern, efficient, and unyielding. By night, he was a ghost in the lower city taverns, a man drowning in a sea of ale and memory. He could not forget the girl's eyes. In the chaos of the burning manor, in the smoke-filled hallway, he had kicked open a door to a small pantry, and there she was, crouched in the corner, covered in soot and plaster, her arms wrapped around two younger girls. Their silver eyes had all turned to him, wide with a terror so pure it had stopped his sword arm mid-swing. He had stood there, a monster in black armor, reflected in those three pairs of brilliant, frightened silver mirrors. He saw his own daughter's face in them. She would have been about the same age, had the fever not taken her 5 winters past. "Please," the oldest girl, Lyra, whispered. Just one word. His orders echoed in his head. No survivors, no witnesses. For the kingdom. He had taken a step forward. Then a massive beam, burning fiercely, had crashed down from the ceiling between them, showering them with sparks and cutting off his path. The girls had flinched back into the shadows. In that moment, a reckless, treasonous thought seized him. He had turned and bellowed down the hall. "This wing is clear, nothing but rubble. Secure the east corridor." He had lied. He had sealed their tomb with his report, not his sword. He told himself the fire would finish the job, that it was a kinder death, a lie to soothe a guilty soul. But the girl had lived. He knew it. The rumors had reached even the disciplined ranks of the Bloodhawks, a silver-eyed ghost in the north, a spirit of vengeance. And now another secret twisted in his gut. He had seen the queen, Ilara, in the royal gardens with the newborn princess. A gust of wind had caught the infant's blanket, and for a fleeting second, before the nursemaid hurriedly covered her again, Ryland Vance had seen the baby's eyes. A luminous, unmistakable silver. The king's own child carried the curse. The horror of it was a physical pain. They had slaughtered an entire family for those eyes, and now those very eyes slept in a royal cradle protected by the man who ordered the slaughter. The hypocrisy was a rotten core at everything. Driven by a guilt that now had a new, urgent shape, Ryland began his second secret life. Using old contacts among the city's couriers and messengers, he started to gather information, not for the crown, for the ghost. He learned of Duke Kaelin's quiet meetings with disgruntled lords. He noted the movement of the palace guard, the schedules, the hidden passages used by servants. He compiled it all, not on official parchment, but on scraps of plain paper, in a simple, unremarkable code. Once a month, he would travel to a different run-down tavern on the outskirts of the capital. He would sit in a shadowed corner, drink one ale too many, and leave a specific coin under the mug, a chipped copper penny, heads up. Within a day, the coin would be gone, and the information with it. He did not know who picked it up. He hoped it was someone who knew how to find a girl with winter wheat hair and silver eyes. He was betraying his king, his commander, his oath. He was committing treason that would see him hanged. But as he sat in the smoky tavern, he realized he had made a choice in that burning hallway 3 years ago. He had chosen the ghost over the crown. Now he had to see that choice through. He had to help the truth, however it came,
find its way home. Duke Kalen studied the chessboard in his lavish solar, but his mind was on a much larger game. The pieces were all moving perfectly. King Ronan was weakening, consumed by guilt, his judgment clouded. The whispers of a Valerius survivor were spreading, a delicious little spark of fear among the nobles, and his own influence in the court grew daily as sensible men looked to him for steady leadership in these uncertain times. His father had taught him well. The blood song prophecy was not history, it was a tool. Fear was the most potent glue for power. The Valerius family were ideal targets, proud, ancient, blessed with those unsettling eyes. Their very existence was a question mark, and Kalen's family made sure the answer the kingdom learned was threat. Eliminating them served two purposes. It removed a potential check on his family's ambitions, and it cemented the narrative of the strong, decisive king protecting his people from dark magic. King Ronan was so easy to manipulate, that idealistic, fearful boy. But now the tool had developed a crack, the survivor. A part of him was irritated. Kane's work was sloppy. Another part was intrigued. This changed the board. A living Valerius was not just a loose end, she was an opportunity. If she appeared, raving about truth and justice, she would be seen as the vindictive sorceress the prophecy promised. King Ronan would be forced to arrest and execute her, further painting himself as the ruthless tyrant. The nobility's disgust would reach a tipping point. That was when Kalen, the calm, reasonable uncle, would step in. Perhaps the poor king, burdened with his horrible but necessary deeds, was no longer fit to rule. The crown might need to pass to a steadier hand. He smiled, moving his knight to put the enemy king in check. Yes, the girl's survival could be made to serve him. He summoned his most discreet agent, a woman who moved like smoke. The rumors from the north, the Valerius girl. I want her found, but not killed. Observed. The agent inclined her head. And if she comes to the capital? Kalen's smile widened. Ensure she has a path, a difficult, twisting path, but a path nonetheless. Let her come. Let her have her moments before the court. Let her scream her truth. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. The spectacle will be her undoing, and the king's. He dismissed the agent and returned to his chessboard. The game was entering its final stages. Ronan was check. The next move would be checkmate. And the survivor, the little silver-eyed pawn, would help deliver it. He failed to notice in his smug planning the third player who had just entered the game. Not the broken king, not the vengeful girl, but the land itself. In the ancient stones of the palace, in the deep roots of the forests, a slow, quiet power was beginning to stir. It had slept for decades, mourning its silenced guardians. Now it sensed the last heir awakening. It sensed the corruption festering in the Duke's heart.
And it was preparing to restore the balance, with or without anyone's permission. The royal palace of Silverwood was a masterpiece of light and shadow. For the Harvest Moon Gala, it was transformed into a breathtaking dream. 1,000 candles blazed, their light reflected in crystal glasses and polished marble floors. The air hummed with the music of strings, the clink of fine china, and the low murmur of 500 voices. Every noble, merchant lord, and courtier of significance pressed into the grand hall like jewels in a box. At the head of it all, on the sunwood throne, sat King Ronan. He wore his crown, his formal robes, and a mask of calm authority. To his court, he appeared in control, but his knuckles were whites where they gripped the arms of the throne. His eyes scanned the crowd, not for threats, but for a ghost. The reports had grown more persistent. She is in the city. She is coming. Beside him, in a place of honor usually reserved for the queen, who was blessedly absent due to a feigned illness, sat Duke Kalen. He looked like a man enjoying a fine performance, a slight, knowing smile on his lips.
He had ensured the security was tight, but with specific, subtle gaps. A path through the servants' corridors was less guarded tonight. The western stair to the high gallery was clear. He had laid a trail of breadcrumbs, and he waited for the mouse to take the bait. Unseen, moving through the crowd like a shadow within shadows, was Captain Rylan Vance. His bloodhawk armor felt like a cage. His eyes flicked to the hidden door behind the tapestry of the First King. That was the path. His information, passed through a chain of trusted whispers, had outlined it perfectly. If she comes, she will come that way. His heart was a drum against his ribs. Part of him hoped she would not come. A larger part knew she had to. And come she did. Lyra Valerius stepped from the servants' passage, not with a flourish, but with the silent inevitability of fate. She wore the plain gray dress of a scullery maid, her remarkable hair hidden under a cap. Her eyes were darkened with ash, their silver muted to a dull gray. She carried a tray of empty wine goblets, her head bowed. She was utterly invisible. She moved through the throng, a silent vessel filling with the sounds of the worlds that had destroyed hers. She heard the snippets of conversation that twisted like knives. A necessary evil, of course. Those Valerius eyes were uncanny. The king showed strength, ruthless but strength. Heard another bloodhawk died last week. Strange illness. Poetic, if you ask me. Each word was a coal placed on the fire in her chest. She kept breathing. She kept moving. She neared the dais. Across the room, Duke Kaelin's agent, posing as a musician, gave a slight nod. She is here. Kaelin's smile deepened. He nudged the lord beside him and gestured subtly toward the plain maid nearing the throne. The lord frowned, not understanding the significance. Lyra reached the foot of the dais. She set her tray down on a low table. This was it, the point of no return. She thought of Alistair's words, "Truth is a seed." She thought of her mother's, "Show them the truth." She raised her head, and she let the ash fall from her eyes. The transformation was subtle but absolute. She did not tear off her cap. She simply stood straight, and the humble maid vanished, replaced by a young woman of startling, fierce presence. The candlelight caught her eyes, and the ash could no longer hold back the innate silver glow. It shone forth, a cold, clear light in the hall warm. A lord sipping wine nearby choked. By the stars, her eyes. The whisper spread, a ripple of unease. Heads turned. King Ronan froze, his breath caught. He knew her instantly, not her face, but her eyes. The eyes from his nightmares given flesh. She was taller than the child he'd imagined, fiercer, and she was looking right at him. Duke Kaelin stood, playing his part. "You, servant, what is the meaning of this?" Lyra ignored him. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was clear, carrying, and utterly calm. It cut through the music and the murmur like a blade through silk. 3 years ago, in the dark of night, soldiers came to my home. They came on the orders of the man who sits on that throne. She pointed at Ronan, her finger steady. They murdered my father at his feast table. They burned my mother alive for shielding me. They slaughtered my sisters, my brother, my aunts, uncles, cousins. 53 souls. They died for a lie. The hall was dead silent. The musicians had stopped playing. The lie is called the Blood Song Prophecy, she continued, pulling a small oiled leather packet from her apron. It says we were sorcerers, that we sought to break the crown. It is a forgery, created by the grandfather of the man beside the king, she swung her gaze to Kaelin, to hide his own corruption. My family were not sorcerers. We were guardians. Our sight was meant to protect this land from the corruption of power. We were the balance, and you killed us for it. She held up the packet. This contains the true text, the Guardian Covenant, and the personal letters of Duke Kaelin's father, detailing the plot. The truth has been waiting in the dark for 40 years. It is done waiting. For a moment, there was only stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. "Seize her! Kaelin thundered, his mask of calm shattering. "She is the sorceress. She has enchanted you all. Guards!" Bloodhawks moved, but they were confused, their eyes darting between their king, their duke, and the silver-eyed girl. Rylan acted. He stepped forward, not toward Lyra, but between her and the advancing guards. "Hold!" His voice, the voice of a commander, boomed through the hall. Every soldier hesitated. "Captain Vance," Kaelin snarled, "you dare?" "I dare to face what I did." Rylan turned to face the crowd, his face a mask of anguish and resolve. "I was there, at Alderwood. I followed my orders. I helped burn that house. And I saw this girl. I saw her silver eyes in the firelight, filled with a terror no child should ever know." He looked at Ronan, his expression pleading. "Your Majesty, we were wrong. We were fed poison and told it was medicine. She speaks the truth." This was the moment Kaelin had wanted. Chaos, accusation, a fractured throne. But the look on Ronan's face was not one of a tyrant cornered. It was one of a man finally seeing the cliff's edge he'd been walking. He stood, slowly. The weight of the crown seemed to physically press him down. "Enough," Ronan said, his voice quiet but carrying. The hall stilled. All eyes turned to the king. He descended the dais steps, his purple robes whispering against the stone. He walked past his stunned uncle, past his loyal, treasonous captain, and stopped an arm's length from Lyra Valerius. He looked into her silver eyes, and she looked into his gold-flecked ones, heavy with grief, as deep as her own. He did not speak to the crowd. He spoke only to her.
"I have heard their screams every night for 3 years," he whispered. A confession for her alone. "Not the soldiers, the children, your brother, Elias, your sisters. I did not know their names, but I see their faces." A tear escaped, tracing a path down his cheek. A king, crying before his entire court. "I was a coward. I was afraid of shadows, and I unleashed a monster to fight them. I destroyed the light to save myself from the dark." He reached up, his hands trembling, and lifted the heavy, jeweled crown from his head, the symbol of his power, his lineage, his sin. He held it in his hands for a long moment, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. Then, slowly, he knelt. He placed the crown on the floor between himself and Lyra. A gasp swept the room like a tidal wave. A king kneeling, a crown discarded. "I offer you no excuse," Ronan said, his voice stronger now, carrying his shame for all to hear. "Only this life, in payment for the ones I took. If vengeance is your truth, take it. It is yours by right." The hall held its breath. This was the moment. The destroyer had come. The king had submitted. The fire in Lyra's eyes blazed, and the ancient stones in the walls of the palace, unnoticed for decades, began to hum with a low, resonant frequency. The hum was not a sound you heard with your ears. It was a vibration you felt in your bones, in the roots of your teeth. A deep, ancient power, waking from a long, grief-stricken sleep. The decorative stone inlays along the walls, simple geometric patterns everyone had forgotten the meaning of, began to glow. A soft, silver-white light, the exact color of Lyra's eyes, pulsed from them, beating in time with her heart. The nobles shrank back, murmuring in superstitious fear. "Sorcery!" someone cried. Duke Kaelin seized the moment, his voice shrill with triumphant fury. "You see, you all see, the dark magic. She seeks to enslave us all. Guards, kill her now." But the guards did not move. They couldn't. The hum, the light, it pressed on them not with violence, but with a profound instinctual weight. It was the land itself, acknowledging its guardian. Lyra felt it flood through her, a connection not of her making, but of her being. She saw not just the people in the room, but the threads that connected them,
The greed coiled in Kaelin's heart like a black serpent, the thick, ropey guilt tying Rylan Vance to her, the fragile, fraying thread of Ronan's remorse. She saw the truth of them, bare and undeniable. She looked down at the king, kneeling in submission. She looked at the crown, a glittering circle of gold and gilt. The fire of vengeance roared in her, fed by 3 years of loneliness, by the memory of her sister's cold hands. It would be so easy. A thought, and the waking magic in the stones might lash out. She could break him, break this palace, break it all. "Show them the truth, my heart, not the fire." Her mother's voice was not a memory. It was a presence, warm and solid at her side. Lyra closed her eyes. She breathed in, and the chaotic power responded, settling, focusing, becoming not a weapon, but a lens. When she opened her eyes again, the blazing fury had cooled into something else, crystalline clarity. "Vengeance would make me your mirror," she said to Ronan, her voice echoing strangely in the humming hall. "It would make me a destroyer, and that is the lie I refuse to live." She did not touch the crown. Instead, she reached out her hand, not in attack, but in offering. "Get up." Ronan stared at her hand, bewildered. "Get up," she repeated, firmer. "A kingdom needs its king on his feet, not groveling in its past mistakes, but facing its future." Trembling, he took her hand. Her grip was strong, calloused from survival. She pulled him to his feet. The gesture was staggeringly simple and more revolutionary than any spell. She turned to the stunned, silent court. The Guardians return, not as rulers, but as witnesses, not as power, but as conscience. The king rules, the Guardian ensures it rules justly. This is the balance. This is the truth my family died for. This is what we restore. She looked at Ronan. "Your choice, King Ronan. You can pick up your crown, but you will never wear it alone again. It will always be weighed against this stone," she patted the glowing wall, "against the truth of the land. Do you accept this balance?" Ronan looked at his crown on the floor. He looked at the hopeful, fearful faces of his people. He looked at Lyra, the living conscience he had tried to kill. He drew a deep breath, the first full breath he felt he had taken in 3 years. "I accept," he said, and he meant it. He bent, not in submission, but in duty, and picked up the crown. It felt different in his hands, lighter and infinitely heavier. 1 year later, the first light of the spring equinox dawned over Silverwood. It did not break over Alderwood Manor, for the ruins had been transformed. Where blackened stone had lain, a memorial garden now flourished. 53 white birches, their bark like silver in the morning light, stood in a gentle circle. At their center was a simple flat stone engraved with names: Cassian, Isolde, Ilara, Mirren, Elias, and all the others. It was not a place of mourning, but of peaceful remembrance.
Lyra Valerius stood before the stone, her hand resting lightly on her rounded belly. The new life within her stirred, a flutter of joy against her palm. The child would have silver eyes. The knowledge filled her not with dread, but with a fierce, protective hope. She was not alone. Beside her stood King Ronan, his crown on his head, but his posture easier, his eyes clearer. The nightmares had not vanished, but they had changed. They were no longer accusations, but conversations. Beside him, holding his finger in a chubby fist, was Princess Lyanna. Her eyes, once hidden, now shone openly, a bright, cheerful silver that saw only wonder in the world. The Valerius curse was now the Guardian's gift, taught in schools, celebrated in stories. A few steps behind stood Captain Rylan Vance, now Commander Vance of the Restored Watchers, an order dedicated to protecting the people and the truth. His guilt remained, a scar on his soul, but it was a scar that had healed clean. He had found his redemption not in forgetting, but in serving the light he had once helped try to extinguish. In the center of the capital, a new wing of the palace had been built, not for a king or a queen. The Hall of Balance was a simple, circular room. On one side stood the sunwood throne. On the other, set into the floor, was the first stone, the ancient foundation stone Lyra had touched. No law could pass, no major judgment could be rendered, unless proposed by the crown and witnessed by the guardian. It was an imperfect system, it was slow, it was often loud with debate, but it was fair. Lyra lived in the palace not as a royal, but as a steward. She trained daily with Alistair, her great-uncle, who now served as the keeper of annals, ensuring history would never again be rewritten by the powerful. She learned statecraft from Ronan, and in turn taught him to listen, to the whispers of the discontented, to the reports from the poorest provinces, to the quiet truth that lived beneath official words. It was not a perfect peace. Old nobles grumbled about shared power. Some still eyed Lyra with suspicion. The work of rooting out the remnants of Kaelin's influence was ongoing, but the land itself was healing. Crops flourished, border conflicts had quieted, as if the very forest itself no longer seethed with the kingdom's inner turmoil. On this morning, as the sun warmed the memorial garden, Ronan spoke softly. "The council meets today, the river dispute between the eastern lords." Lyra nodded, her eyes on her father's name. "Lord Garvin's claim is based on a forged land grant from Kaelin's time. The truth is in the Water Warden's scrolls, in the third archive. I'll show you before the session." Ronan smiled, a genuine, easy smile. "How do you always know?" She placed her free hand on the cool memorial stone. "I listen, and some voices, her own silver eyes glowing softly in the dawn, speak from the stone, from the water, from the heart of things. You just have to learn how to hear them." She turned from the memorial, taking the king's offered arm, the little princess giggling between them. Ryland fell into step behind them, a silent, steadfast shadow. They walked away from the garden, not leaving the past behind, but carrying it with them, not as a burden of vengeance, but as a foundation for what was to come. The pack had killed her family, thinking they had saved themselves, but in leaving one alive, they had not created a destroyer. They had awakened a restorer. And in the gentle, unwavering light of her silver eyes, the kingdom of Silverwood found not an ending, but its long-lost beginning. The end.